My name is Caleb Foster, and the day my daughter looked me in the eye and called me nothing more than her personal ATM was the day something inside me shattered. It wasn't anger that cut the deepest. It was the realization that years of sacrifice, of love I thought was unconditional, had been reduced to a transaction. That betrayal didn't just wound me, it hollowed me out. And it was in that hollow space that I finally understood. If I didn't walk away, I would lose the last piece of myself I had left. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't soothe but presses down on your chest. 10 years had passed since the night I buried the only woman who ever made these walls feel alive. What remained were polished floors, expensive furniture, and photographs on the walls that felt more like evidence than memories. Each frame held a smile I could still trace, but none of them belonged to the life I live now. I had built everything from nothing, restaurants across the state, a reputation carved by hard work and long nights, but success was a hollow thing when the only voice echoing back to me belonged to my own. My daughter was the only thread left connecting me to a family that no longer existed. Yet even that bond had thinned to something fragile, strained by years of expectation and disappointment. The sound came sharp against the stillness, 3 quick rings of the doorbell, one after another. My chest tightened instantly. That rhythm belonged to only one person. I already knew what stood on the other side of the door before I even opened it. She stood there, her perfume heavy in the air, her arms thrown around me as if affection could erase the weight in her eyes. I felt the hesitation in her embrace, the calculation behind the smile she forced behind her. Ethan strolled in without asking, his shoes clicking confidently on the floor as he settled into my chair like it had been waiting for him. He spread a neat stack of papers across the table, his gestures practiced, clinical. I didn't need to hear the words to know this wasn't a visit. The pretense dropped quickly. Sophia's voice wavered just enough to sound like desperation, but the message was delivered with brutal clarity. $500,000. Not next week, not in a few months, tomorrow, by noon. Ethan leaned back in my chair as though he owned it, flipping the papers like a man sealing a business deal. His voice was smooth, but there was no mistaking the arrogance behind it. He called it an investment opportunity, a golden chance that couldn't be missed. But I could see straight through the polished words, the numbers, the deadlines, the urgency. It all smelled of desperation, and underneath it I recognized the stench of gambling debts. Sophia sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands tracing the delicate necklace her mother had left her. She always reached for it when she needed to bend the truth. Her tone wavered with practiced emotion as she said they wouldn't be here if it weren't urgent. That family should always come first. I watched her carefully, every inflection designed to remind me of the little girl I once protected. Then Ethan dropped his first blade. If I refused, he said, there were others who would come looking for payment. People who wouldn't care about civility or reputation. His eyes flicked toward me with a cold smirk, as though he already knew I would bend. And when I didn't speak, Sophia struck harder. She pulled her mother's memory into the room like a weapon, whispering that if Margaret were still alive, she would be ashamed of me for leaving them to struggle. The words slid under my skin like glass. For a moment, it was as if my late wife was watching, judging me through our daughter's mouth. My hands tightened into fists on the arm of the chair. I said nothing, but inside, where the old wound had split open, another thought stirred, quiet but resolute. Not this time. This time will be different. I lay awake that night, the echoes of their voices circling the empty rooms. The memories returned uninvited, dragging me through the years when I had written checks without hesitation. The brand new car Sophia begged for at 22. The tuition I covered when Ethan swore grad school would be his turning point. The seed money poured into a can't-fail startup that collapsed within months. And the wedding, $100,000 for a single day of glitter and photographs, while I smiled and convinced myself I was buying happiness. Every time, I believed I was keeping us together, protecting what little family I had left. In truth, all I had done was chip away at my authority as a father, until the only role left for me was financier, A man with a wallet instead of a voice. That illusion cracked for good when Thomas, my lawyer and oldest friend, forwarded me an email Sophia had sent to one of her friends. I read the words over and over, each time cutting deeper. My dad is basically a walking ATM. He'll pay. He always does. I dropped the paper onto my desk and gripped its edges until my knuckles turned white. My hands trembled, not from age, but from rage and heartbreak colliding in my chest. In that moment, I finally knew with absolute certainty I would never be their ATM again. Thomas's office was a world away from the chaos inside my head. Floor-to-ceiling windows let in a pale Denver morning, but the light felt cold, like it was dissecting me along with the paperwork scattered across his desk. He closed the door quietly, his expression already carrying the weight of what he was about to show me. Without a word, he slid a folder toward me. Inside were photographs, grainy but unmistakable. Ethan at a Vegas blackjack table, a crumpled credit slip in his hand, his eyes hollow. Each shot was time-stamped, recent. Thomas's voice stayed calm, but each sentence landed like a hammer. Ethan wasn't just gambling. He had used my name to guarantee a high-interest loan from people who didn't need contracts to collect. The papers on the desk spelled it out, my signature forged, my reputation leveraged without my knowledge. I felt my stomach turn. He reached for another file, thicker than the first. This one contained the deed to the house where Sophia and Ethan lived. Thomas reminded me how Sophia had signed it years ago without reading past the second page. The legal owner was still me. Everything they flaunted, every square foot, every borrowed luxury, had been built from my money. They had never truly owned a thing. Thomas hesitated before reading aloud a message Sophia had sent a friend just days earlier. The words blurred, but I caught them anyway. He'll never say no. We just have to push the right buttons. The sound of my own blood rushing drowned out the city below. It felt like a knife sliding in between my ribs, slow, deliberate. That night, the Colorado air pressed cold and sharp against the windows of my study. I sat at the desk where I had signed every check for them, a blank one in front of me. This time, I didn't sign. I tore it neatly in half, the sound as final as a door slamming shut. I moved with a precision I hadn't felt in years. Bank statements, loan papers, the photos Thomas had given me, printed screenshots of Sophia's messages, all sorted, stacked, and sealed into an old Amazon box, her name written across the top in black marker like a verdict. I called Thomas again, my voice steadier than I expected, instructing him to freeze every card and account tied to my name, to transfer back what I still controlled. By morning, there would be nothing left for them to drain. Then I booked my escape through a no-name travel agent 2 towns over. A one-way ticket to Florida at 5:45 a.m., a connecting flight out of the country before noon. No online traces, no breadcrumbs. When Sophia and Ethan left my house that evening, they thought they'd won again. I even nodded when she said she'd check back around noon tomorrow for the transfer. But while they slept, still believing in the old man who always rescued them, I would be thousands of miles away, not running from a debt, running from the slow erosion of myself I had allowed for far too long. By noon the next day, Sophia and Ethan pulled up in their gleaming SUV, their confidence shining as brightly as the polished chrome. They walked up my front steps certain their payday was waiting. The door was locked. On the porch table sat a plain Amazon box, taped neatly, her name scrawled across the top. Sophia snatched it up, a smile flickering across her lips, convinced she was about to find a thick envelope inside. She tore the flaps apart, only for her face to pale. The first stack of papers listed, line by line, every dollar I had given them over the last decade. Mortgages, car loans, failed ventures. The total at the bottom glared back at her. More than $1.2 million. Ethan grabbed the next bundle, photographs of himself at a blackjack table in Las Vegas, losing hand after hand. His face flushed crimson as he shouted, "Who was following me?" Then came the emails, printed, highlighted, undeniable. Sophia's own words stared back at her. "My dad's just a walking ATM. Push the right buttons and he'll pay." Her hands trembled, mascara streaking down her cheeks as reality clawed through the last of her denial. In a panic, Ethan pulled out his phone, trying to transfer money from their joint account. The screen flashed red, account frozen. Every safety net they had relied on was gone, and while they stood there unraveling, I was already miles away, high above the clouds on a flight out of Florida, leaving the wreckage behind me. That afternoon, Sophia sat on the front steps clutching the scattered papers, her body rigid with shock. Ethan kicked at the door, cursed my name, then hurled the box into the yard before storming off. Tires screeched as he disappeared down the street. Word spread quickly. By evening, neighbors whispered he'd run south to Dallas to dodge the men who wanted their money back. The collapse came fast. A tow truck rolled up not long after, hooking their luxury SUV and dragging it away while Sophia screamed that it was hers. The driver calmly pointed at the title, my name printed in bold letters, by dusk. She tried her card at the local supermarket, clinging to the hope that some piece of the old life remained. The cashier shook his head as the register beeped. Decline after decline. Strangers behind her watched in silence, some with pity, others with thinly veiled judgment. Sophia gathered her purse with shaking hands, humiliation burning hotter than tears. That night, she called me once, twice, then more than 20 times. Each ring echoed into nothing, unanswered. My phone was already shut off. I was no longer her lifeline, no longer the father she could summon with a demand. For the first time, she had no one left to lean on. The morning light poured in through thin curtains, and for the first time in decades, I didn't wake to a phone vibrating with demands or obligations. I stepped barefoot onto the cool tiles of a small room facing the sea, the sound of waves crashing like a steady heartbeat just beyond the balcony. The air smelled of salt and mangroves, and with it came a calm I had almost forgotten existed. I brewed a simple cup of coffee, sat on a wicker chair, and let the sunrise wash over me. Freedom had a taste, quiet, unhurried, unclaimed by anyone but me. Meanwhile, back in Colorado, the silence in the house Sophia once called her kingdom was suffocating. She sat hunched on the floor, surrounded by boxes she couldn't afford to move, her cheeks streaked with tears that refused to dry. The curtains stayed shut, but the truth bled in through every crack. The home was no longer hers, and soon the locks would be changed. By midday, I was standing in a modest classroom by the beach, a blackboard behind me, and children repeating broken English with wide grins. Their laughter filled the air as they mispronounced words, and I laughed with them. They called me Mr. Caleb, the teacher, and for once the title felt better than provider or ATM. That same afternoon, Sophia opened a letter from the bank. The property was scheduled for foreclosure in 30 days. Minutes later, her phone lit with Ethan's last message, 5 words that sealed her abandonment. I can't take it anymore. Handle it yourself. Night fell in 2 different worlds. I tasted peace with every step along the Caribbean shore, while Sophia, exhausted after her first shift at a cafe, stared at a crumpled $20 bill in her palm. She broke down, sobbing, not because of the money's size, but because for the first time in her life, she had earned it. News came to me in pieces, the way change often does, quietly, almost cautiously, as if afraid I wouldn't believe it. Thomas called one morning while I was drinking coffee on the balcony, the sea breeze warm against my skin. His tone carried something I hadn't heard in years, cautious optimism. He told me Sophia had left the big house behind. The locks were changed, the driveway empty. She'd packed what she could and rented a small apartment on the edge of town. No chauffeurs, no marble counters, no illusion of grandeur, just 4 plain walls she could finally afford. Not long after, another update followed. The luxury SUV that had once been her pride was gone. She'd sold it herself, without a plea for my help or a single phone call. That car had been her trophy, the symbol of a life she thought she deserved but never earned. Letting it go meant something had cracked inside her, something I hadn't been able to reach with money or warnings. Then Thomas mentioned something stranger still. Sophia had been seen at the public library, carrying home armfuls of books on budgeting, saving, and financial planning. She took notes, he said, as if she were studying for an exam. This from the same daughter who used to laugh at my spreadsheets, mocking the way I tracked every dollar as if it were life or death. The irony was almost too sharp to swallow. One evening, as the Caribbean sun bled orange into the horizon, my phone lit up with her name. For a moment, my chest tightened the way it always had when she called, expecting another demand, another ultimatum, but the message was only one line. Dad, I've found a job. I'm trying. I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know. I stared at the words, reading them again and again. Not for money, not for rescue, just to tell me she was standing on her own 2 feet, however shakily. The twist came later, when Thomas sent me a photo he'd taken while visiting her new apartment. On a small dresser, propped up against the wall, was a single-frame picture. It was from her college graduation, the two of us standing side by side, her cap tilted awkwardly, my smile wide and unguarded. That photograph had once been her way of flaunting my pride, proof of what she thought she was owed. Now it served as her reminder, her goalpost. She wasn't looking at it to show off anymore. She was looking at it to become the woman who could earn that look in her father's eyes again. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe she might. A year later, I found myself standing in front of a modest apartment building on the outskirts of Denver. The paint was chipped, the stairwell smelled faintly of dust and coffee, but the place had a heartbeat. The mansion never did. I raised my hand to knock, and before I could lose my nerve, the door opened. Sophia stood there, thinner than I remembered, her hair tied back simply, her clothes plain but clean. She didn't wear the expensive jewelry or the masks of wealth she once clung to, and yet her eyes carried a brightness I had never seen before. It startled me, in the best way. She let me in without a word. The apartment was small but warm, the kind of space made alive by effort, not money. We sat at a wooden table that had seen better years. Dinner was a pot of pasta with vegetables, nothing elaborate, but we both ate slowly, quietly, as if savoring the strangeness of sharing a meal without pretense. No glittering chandeliers, no waiters, no stage to perform for. Just a father and his daughter, finally stripped of everything except truth. Halfway through the meal, her hands began to tremble. She dropped her fork and buried her face in her palms. When she finally looked up, her tears weren't the polished act I had grown used to. They were raw, heavy, unrestrained. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I understand now. I want to start over." I reached into my bag and pulled out an envelope. Her shoulders stiffened, but when she tore it open, she froze. Inside wasn't money. It was a contract, an invitation. I had started a nonprofit program, teaching young adults the basics of money management, discipline, and independence. Her name was typed on the first page as a potential coordinator. I looked her in the eyes, steady and unflinching. "I will never fund your life again," I told her, my voice firm but not unkind. "But if you're serious, if you truly want to rebuild, I'm willing to work alongside you, not as your provider, this time, as your partner." For a long moment she couldn't speak. Then she nodded through her tears, reached across the table, and gripped my hand as if she were afraid I'd vanish again. In that cramped apartment, something unspoken passed between us, not a return to what was lost, but the fragile beginning of something new. As I walked away that night, I carried one truth with me. Sometimes the greatest act of love isn't saving someone from their fall. It's stepping aside and letting them learn how to stand on their own.